This video contains spoilers for Need for Speed Unbound and flashing lights throughout. Need for Speed Unbound is an action-focused arcade racing title released in 2022 for the PC, alongside the next-gen PlayStation and Xbox consoles. Developed by Criterion and published by Electronic Arts, Unbound is the 25th member of the Need for Speed family, and the successor to 2019's warmly regarded NFS Heat. With its release, Unbound looked to carry on the formal front cover NFS rebrand from Heat, whilst simultaneously throwing on a fresh coat of paint with a new hybrid art style, consisting of cel-shaded character models alongside realistic vehicles, street art-inspired driving effects, and a reimagining of Need for Speed's police mechanics by incorporating them back into both the day and night cycles. Upon its reveal and subsequent reviews, Unbound received a somewhat warm reception from critics, with praise being given for the success of Unbound's newly incorporated driving effects, refined racing mechanics, and being overall a fun time to play. However, since its release, Unbound has seen increased criticism for its lacklustre story, a divisive handling system, misuse of its police mechanics, and of course its indefensible micro-transactions. With all this considered though, I've been a long-standing fan of the NFS series since playing Most Wanted back on the Xbox 360. I also quite enjoyed the aforementioned NFS Heat, so I thought it was now finally time that I jumped into the driver's seat to see if Unbound is all show and no go, as some would suggest, or if it can stand on the podium alongside the best of the Need for Speed series. For now though, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you stay updated for future videos. We begin with the character creator, which for a Need for Speed title was certainly unexpected, and it's here we find a selection of avatars to choose from that range in style and looks. Working through the options, once we make our choice, we can then customize our character through various facial, vocal, and clothing choices. The options aren't particularly varied, but they at least attempt to give players the choice to express themselves. That said though, the cel-shaded character models we are introduced to here are admittedly jarring at first, as they represent quite an aesthetic change from the previous Need for Speed titles. The customization options also feel very awkward to work through. For example, when looking to change my character's face, on certain selections, the model continued to move their head out of the way. And although I could move the camera around a bit, they would never look forward for me to be able to assess my choice. Another strange thing I noticed is that there is no option to customize the eyebrows of our character, which may seem like an odd criticism, however, it unfortunately highlights these janky and disinteresting character customization options. It's also just a weirdly absent option that resulted in my character looking like he had painted on eyebrows from here on out. If I'm able to customize my character's eyes, facial hair, and even add scars and band-aids, I should at least be able to update something as simple as eyebrow color. Alongside these facial customization options, Unbound offers further aesthetic choices through clothing, with our options being very limited at this point and not necessarily fitting my preferred style of a basic t-shirt and jeans, but they do a fine enough job of adding some further personality to the character models. There is also an option to customize our character's voice. However, there are no options for additional accents, with only generic male and female voice clips, alongside a slider available for vocal tones, which we will hear throughout our story. I don't necessarily oppose the change to this cel-shaded style for the characters, because as we will see later, they fit into Unbound's aesthetic quite well in my opinion. However, to make this system more complete, the developers really should have implemented a more user-friendly camera and more varied facial feature options. For example, rather than having the character model stand there and emote the entire time, why not animate them to sit down on a barber chair and the player could rotate that to assess their options? Or why not have them take a seat in a car where the rear vision mirror can act as a way for the players to assess their choices when customizing? It all just screams bare minimum, and I admit whilst the artistic choice overall is appreciated, by way of these simple quality of life and customization options being absent, I can't help but feel that this system was an afterthought. With that criticism aside though, and our character model finalized, we now get to choose a starting vehicle from a lineup of 3 junkers. Here we can select a Dodge Charger, Lamborghini Countach, or a Nissan Silvia, representing the typical trifecta of muscle, exotic, and tuner options. Although they each have their own distinct style and performance, all 3 are relatively balanced, so there is no real disadvantage in picking one over the other. And in this instance, we pick the Silvia, with this choice then taking us some time into the future, where the story proper begins. Hearing our character and their friend Yaz for the first time, we hear them discuss the work they've put into the junker throughout the summer months, and it's finally time to take it for a test drive. With a quick transition, we drive into the night, and we're given an introduction to the basics of driving with a simple tutorial. Here we get the typical right trigger to accelerate and left trigger to brake, and we get a feel for the vehicle handling. In Unbound, cornering is performed by either drifting through a simple touch of the brake, or by holding speed and gripping through the apex with a more traditional simulator-style cornering model. Either choice of cornering will also build the newly introduced nitrous burst gauge, which is more formally tutored later. However, if the player is accustomed to how Need for Speed handles nitrous, they'll have already gotten a grasp of it early on. The yellow nitrous burst gauge is filled by the aforementioned cornering options, alongside other racing actions, such as drafting or near misses of traffic. And once a minimum of 1 bar is filled of a maximum of 3, a tab of the nitrous will produce a powerful burst of speed. When the 3 bars of burst nitrous are fully built, however, they are banked for a short period of time and can be used for a more impactful overtake or a recovery from a corner. This can also be built instantly by taking out police vehicles, which is very handy, especially on higher heat runs where police are plentiful and always find a way to drive into your path. In addition to the burst nitrous though, there is also traditional nitrous available, indicated by the blue gauge located next to the speedometer, with the standard nitrous being activated by a hold rather than a quick tap. And although accessed with the same button prompt, surprisingly, both nitrous options are easily distinguishable. As we approach the end of this portion of the tutorial though, our character and Yaz speak of their expected victory in an upcoming street race, which with a quick transition, we are thrust into. Here we also get to see more of the holographic checkpoints that Unbound utilizes to create its tracks, with rally-style cornering indicators on each bend and turn. Green checkpoints indicate race progression points, and if the player is to crash or miss a checkpoint, they will be reset to the one closest to them or the one that they missed. These checkpoints of course feel very arcadey at first, however they quickly blend in with the rest of Unbound's aesthetic and feel quite at home amongst the animations. In contrast to the green, yellow checkpoints indicate the finish line for each race, and in this instance they act as another transition point with us jumping off an overpass and drawing the attention of some police interceptors. Here we get a very mild introduction to the police, with a few joining in on the race. With their inclusion, it can be noticed that high speed near misses with police build 2 bars of burst nitrous instantly, which we can take advantage of to either outpace or smash into the pursuing police, or catch back up to rival racers when competing. It's worth noting here though that the burst nitrous is a point of criticism that Unbound regularly receives. Although the burst offers an aggressive plume of colour and an engine roar, there isn't always a tangible impact to our vehicle's acceleration, unless all 3 bars are banked. At times, the burst will help the player easily pass rival racers, and other times it will make little impact, even when door to door against a racer on the streets. I also found that the burst more so feels like a course correction measure, or in other words, a safety net. With the drifts of both questionable and masterful efficiencies building the burst gauge, it can feel like a get out of jail free card, allowing us to recorrect our trajectory and allow our vehicle to reposition onto the track. The burst nitrous, however, looks great, and it also wonderfully complements the sense of speed that Unbound creates through its use of lighting and motion blur. At night in particular, the tail lights produce a streak towards the back of the car that gives a deeper feeling of the car's acceleration, and the driving effects pop with wonderful colour. The whip of the wind during the near misses also adds wonderfully to the sense of speed, and crashes have immense impact when colliding at top speed. In speedruns, for example, which we will look at in more detail later, the speed mixed with the near misses and cornering really gets the adrenaline pumping. Also, if you nail a launch at the beginning of a race by holding the accelerator within the green zone, this also has a similar burst that, alongside the driving effects, adds to the sense of speed, making a race feel intense from start to finish. That said though, whilst the burst nitrous is a welcome change, and I can give props to the developers for trying something new, I feel that a big improvement that could be made is that rather than building 3 individual gauges that build up relatively quickly, there should be a requirement for a larger soul gauge to be filled completely before being usable. This could be built by using the same racing actions already implemented, but rather than being used as the get out of jail free card the burst currently acts as, the burst would have a more strategic use and impact on the races. Will you save your burst for the final stretch to sneak out the victory at the last moment, or will you need to use the burst for a quick recovery after a bad corner or crash? I feel like this change would add a lot more depth and impact to the system, and with a few simple tweaks such as these, the developers could create something very special with this mechanic. Getting back to our race, however, and using the skills we've learnt up to this point, we continue through the city in an attempt to escape the pursuing police. And in doing so, Yaz points out the nearby bridge, which we work our way towards, jumping off, and then getting a Fast and the Furious 2 inspired cutscene and title drop. With the sun rising, we get a few shots showing off some admittedly beautiful vehicle models, such as a sleek Aston Martin and a Nissan GTR, within a location we will become very familiar with moving forward, the garage Rydell's Rides. Pulling in our character and Yaz talk about a race being held in the city district The Heights this evening, where some big money will be on the line. And in stepping out of the car, we formally meet the namesake of the garage, Rydell, and he is impressed with the work done on the junker. He also remarks that he knows what our intentions are with such a powerful vehicle, and whilst he won't tell us not to race, he does warn us of racing in the Heights. So with a big race ready to be held and our confidence high, there is just one thing left, for the junker to get a name. We get the opportunity here to customize our license plate, which I admittedly never revisited, and once completed, we are placed into the garage menu. Here we can view and customize our vehicles and character, but for now, we are interested in the play option, which I can't help but think should be titled race or drive. This option then takes us to the map screen and into a quick event selection tutorial. Each time before we leave the garage, we will need to review the map, select where we want to go, and set a route to that location, which in this case is a meetup, which are the starting locations of race events. For tutorial purposes, we only have one event within this meetup to select. However, this does open up quite a bit later. When ready and finalizing the event selection, we venture out of the garage and begin to make our way to the first meetup. Making it to the underground lot filled with competitors, we can then again select the event we want to participate in and jump in. We then get a quick loading screen showing off our vehicle and then a title drop for the event. With a 3, 2, 1, the race is on and we speed our way through Lakeshore, the fictional city and surrounds based on Chicago that Unbound takes place in. In Lakeshore, the compact city blocks are filled with traffic and pedestrians, and the open back fields of the countryside are sprawling, allowing the player to reach immense levels of speed. There are also distinct areas on the map, from test tracks, winding mountain passes, and construction sites to name a few. The lighting throughout the city and the map is also something to behold in Unbound, with reflections of the sun in puddles and your vehicle wonderfully expressed. The lighting is even more of a standout at night, however, with the city lights beaming and blurring as the player speeds past. That said, however, amongst the bright lights and the traffic, the pedestrians themselves feel very low effort, with the overuse of the "what" meme soundbite really making the pedestrians feel like NPCs rather than living beings in this world. Overall, Lakeshore does a fair job of feeling like a sprawling city with distinct locations, and although not perfect, when the goal is to speed through these areas, amongst the motion blur and streaking lights, the shortfalls are easily forgotten. In returning to our car, we continue to avoid the police, outpace our rivals, and in the end, we win our first race. In a post-event screen, we can review the cash earned from the race, and as mentioned earlier, we are also shown our heat gain, which is indicated with a brief snapshot outlining our heat level, as well as what police resistance we can expect to encounter next. After our latest victory, we start to make our way back to the garage, with the time driving being filled with another conversation between our character and Yaz, with her remarking that the meetup lacked style and that when she is running them, they will be epic. After all, she doesn't want to spend the rest of her life working at the garage. She has greater ambitions. Once arriving back at the garage though, we bank our cash, get a rundown of the heat earned from the day's events, and transition from day to night. Here we gain access to the customization of our driving effects that, as mentioned, activate during various racing actions, such as the use of the burst nitrous, drifting, and launching at the beginning of a race, to name a few. These graphics aren't just superimposed over the top of the smoke and vehicles either. They feel as much a part of the car as the wheels and the spoiler. Upon initial review of the marketing materials, I thought that these would get in the way and interfere with the racing. However, in taking them for a spin, I found myself growing a liking for them. It's not unique to say that they give off a very Into the Spider-Verse vibe, and I feel they add a lot of style and flair to the driving, and exaggerate the driving actions of drifts and overtaking in a fun way, and I found myself really appreciating them during my playthrough. These aren't for everyone, however, and there are various levels of criticism regarding these driving effects and their implementation. Upon release, the driving effects were mentioned by some players to be distracting, and others felt that the effects didn't match the aesthetic of the vehicles and the racing. Additionally, in Unbound's early days, these driving effect tags were a universal option, with the tags selected being attached to each vehicle within the player's garage, as opposed to being able to be customized for each ride. This restriction has thankfully been removed with later patches though, which is a move in the right direction. It's also of note that these effects can be changed to standard smoke through the same effects menu within the garage, allowing players to choose the aesthetic that they prefer, which I feel strikes the right balance of intended aesthetics and player choice. Whilst we work through our initial effect selections, we also hear Rydell mentioning that a client wants a vehicle tuned, prepped, and ready for pickup tomorrow, and it needs the Jasmine touch. So with Rydell's request, Yaz agrees to work on the cars after this evening's race. Next, we make it back to the map screen, this time under the cover of darkness, and it's explained that meetups at night typically have larger cash payouts, but may also have higher heat gains and requirements attached to them as well. We also learn that the heat earned from the day carries over into the night, bringing greater risk through an increased police presence into the evening's events, with returning to the garage to bank our winnings, clearing our heat, and restarting the cycle for the next day. In selecting the next meetup, we also get to see that not all races are free, as there are buy-in requirements for higher value races. So we need to race through the lower ranks first to earn our way into the bigger events. By choosing the meetup and then leaving the garage, the time is again filled by small talk between our character and Yaz, and we learn that they both grew up in the foster system, where one day they were taken in by Rydell. However, while our character is thankful and content at the garage, Yaz has an itch for something greater. Getting to the meetup, we again make our event selection, and alongside the race title drop, we get a quick cinematic showing off some of the rival races and their emotes, which always feel a bit cringe. These emotes are also present in end event screens, where our character will pose in front of our car prior to the results, which can get very repetitive. The race lineup emotes are thankfully skippable though, so they aren't forced upon the player, which is a welcomed quality of life choice. In moving forward, however, and racing through and winning the current race, we learn that if a pursuit is still ongoing after a race's completion, after the results screen, there will be a transition into a countdown towards the continuation of the pursuit. What I don't really get though is why this countdown is included. I feel that it's a result of each race having a more formal podium-like screen at the end of each event, but it feels like a strange inclusion. In Heat, for example, if a race involving police concluded, the player maintained control of their vehicle and the pursuit continued seamlessly afterwards. This built a lot more pressure and felt more intense, where this restart in Unbound breaks a lot of that police chase tension that prior titles have been able to build so well. With that said though, level 1 police are pathetic and can be easily decommissioned or outrun, and so we are quickly able to escape and make it back to the meetup point to buy into the next race. In speeding through the city, we again make it to the top of the podium and make it back to Rydell's to transition back to the day and restart our heat. In the garage, whilst we select our next meetup, Yaz grovels with Rydell about the work that she did on the client cars overnight, and without much of a thanks from Rydell, she storms off. And so we are on our own for the next event. In the drive to the meetup, Yaz gives us a call, and although she needs some time to cool off, she does ask if we can pick up a friend of hers who is in some trouble with the cops. And in making our way to them, we undergo the NFS equivalent of an escort mission, where we need to transport a racer to a nearby safe house whilst also avoiding the police. Although at a glance these calls could be disruptive events, because of the rewards offered, they are always worth partaking in, as each SOS call unlocks a safe house which can be used to escape the police and bank our cash after each event. These spread out over the game and can also be unlocked by purchasing them. However, the SOS missions are a much more enjoyable and less resource dependent option. Plus, the time spent driving is filled with a bit of banter between our character and the racer. And whilst a bit awkward at times, the dialogue works to add some personality to the faces you'll see on the streets. In dropping off the racer, we make our way back to the meetup, with Rydell giving us a call and letting us know that the clients that picked up the cars Yaz worked on last night are very impressed by the work, and he wants to celebrate. When we call Yaz though, she isn't happy that she hasn't gotten a personal thank you for her work from Rydell, and in her frustration, ends our conversation. From here, we select our next event and sprint around the winding mountains of Buena Vista and learn a key lesson, that mistakes are costly in Unbound. Whilst on the home stretch of this event, I crashed out hard and was overtaken, so I decided to restart the race. This then showed me that race restarts are limited. So if you make a costly mistake, you'll either have to eat into your limited restarts or take the L. The amount of restarts available is also determined by the difficulty selected for the game, with the highest available being 10. As we will come to see, however, the AI aren't slouches. Even on lower difficulties, they stick to you like glue, which on the final few turns of a tight race can really make the palms sweat. That said though, the AI and the difficulty can be very inconsistent, with the rubber banding of rival racers at times keeping them right on your heels, and at other times slingshotting them yards ahead of your position. In some of the later races too, there were times that I thought I had gotten to the front of the pack, only to realise that there was a rival racer hundreds of yards ahead, and no matter how well I drove or how fast I went, I could simply never catch them. Upon my initial realization that the rival AI and rubber banding could be this aggressive and effective, I was admittedly frustrated, because at the end of the day, an arcade racer is all about fun, and it's usually the most fun when you are winning, which, as we have established thanks to the rival racers, isn't always so simple in Unbound. That said, however, after spending a considerable amount of time on the streets of Lakeshore, I can say that I love this more aggressive and intimidating take on the rival races. I found in previous NFS titles, like Payback for example, once you were in first place during an event, it became more or less a one-horse race, whereas in Unbound, the rival races will push you to your best, and one mistake can spell defeat. Of course, there will always be those out there that even on higher difficulties will say Unbound's rival races are easy pickings, but for me, these races were genuine challenges and fun to race, which I love. Back to the race though, and making the same mistake again, I was thankfully saved by a passing patrol unit and win the event. Making it back to the garage, this time we get introduced to the cosmetic options through body kits, which we will look at in more detail later. Thankfully though, Rydell has a spare tuning kit from an old client, which just so happens to fit our Sylvia, and is classed as a legendary custom, which is a more unique look available for some specific vehicles. Getting back to the map, we can now see that multiple meetups can be run at the same time, increasing the amount of available events for each run. These are explained to vary in their rewards, risks, and entry requirements, so it's worth taking some time to pick which event has the highest reward and lowest buy-in cost. Driving to the next meetup, Yaz is back in the passenger seat and says that she has a way to make some extra cash as a friend of hers, Alec, whom she met through the foster system, may be looking for a driver. And although it's not a concrete job, it could be well worth being ready to take it on should we continue to draw Alec's attention. In making it to this meetup, we also check out the Rivals option, which when selected lets us read a short summary on each of the races that we will take on, which whilst adding some further personality to the races, they don't add anything of substance to the gameplay. What I do find strange here though is that we don't get to inspect the rival vehicles further. There was clearly a lot of work put into each to make them stand out, but besides on the track, you don't get to see much of them. This seems like a missed opportunity, as I think it would be really interesting to check out each ride to see the work put into them and get a better feel for the competition. I feel it would also add to the world building and would feel very OG Fast and the Furious in being able to walk the lineup, check out the builds, and also get some inspiration for our own cars should we see a model or a build that we like. For example, Waru's, what I assume to be a Nissan Fairlady, is an absolute unit, but we don't get to see much of it beyond this limited angle and in the blur of the track, which is a shame. Moving forward though, we race, win, and make it back to the garage yet again. Time is skipped forward here though, and it's explained that the weekends hold the biggest events, so races only take part in the evening. Here, Yaz also notes that the aforementioned Alec has been impressed with our performances so far, and that he will be at the meetup, watching us closely to assess our potential. Making it to the meetup, although it is hyped up, it's just another sprint race, and we again race and win. On the way back to the garage though, Alec calls Yaz, and it's explained that we have well and truly caught his attention, and he wants us to complete a quick pickup and drop off job for him. Although our character is apprehensive, with Yaz's enthusiasm, we are convinced to take the job, and make our way to the collection point to grab an oddly beautiful Nissan Z, with Yaz taking the junker, and then working our way towards the drop off point. However, our enjoyment is cut short as police begin to pursue us, and it appears that the ride we have picked up is hot. The pursuing cops don't pose much of a threat however, and so we make it to the drop off where we find the lot empty. We also try calling Yaz in our confusion, however she isn't picking up and the garage alarm has started to go off, so we abandon the job and race off to see what is going on. In arriving, we see that the garage is being robbed, and a large group of racers are making off with the vehicles inside, with Rydell offering little resistance. Although Yaz finally arrives, Rydell questions her as to who this group is, and while she says she doesn't know, right on cue, an escaping racer yells out using her name, saying that they need to get out of there. It appears that the group knows Yaz, and it's assumed that she told the other racers in the heights during the meetups about the garage and the valuable vehicles inside. With this, Rydell aggressively confronts her, and in doing so, pushes her away, and she drives off into the night with the junker build, stealing it alongside everything else. After these events, time moves 2 years into the future, and we see the still persisting effects of the robbery. The garage is empty and money is getting tight, and with few clients left to service, our character has picked up a side hustle through using the garage's skyline to complete Uber-like pickups. This plot device then leads nicely into a phone call from a woman named Tess, who needs a ride, and in making it to her, we are requested to drive to an old meetup point for street races, which is said to be a thing of the past since the new mayor's crackdown on the racing culture in Lakeshore. However, when arriving, we are pleased to see that the racing scene is on its way back, with a large group of racers already occupying the lot. Not long after our arrival though, none other than Yaz speeds into the lot, and she announces to the group that the meetups are back. As was foreshadowed earlier, she is now in charge, and it's time to take back to the streets. Revealing a trunk full of cash, she announces 3 qualifiers, one each week that if won, will guarantee entry into the grand final. Before we can confront Yaz about the robbery and our car however, sirens are heard, the racers disperse, and we now need to get Tass out of here. Escaping the police with ease yet again though, we make it back to the garage and speak with Rydell. We explain to him that Yaz is back, she still has our car, and with the announcement of the Lakeshore Grand, we need to win, qualify, and take her on. Not only to get our car back, but also to earn back the garage's reputation. Despite this though, whilst we have the motivation to compete, we don't have any cash. However, Tess is more than happy to lend us a helping hand here and dip into her pockets. Tess went to the meetup in the first place to find a racer to back, make some bets, and make some bank. And she has found just that in us, so she offers to invest in the garage to help us get back on track and race to the top. So with the investment of Tess, we are introduced to the dealership, which can be accessed at any safe house where we can select from a variety of vehicles to start our journey. There is a nice variety in this starting selection, with an option that should suit everyone's taste, but for me, I decided to stick with my personal brand of choice in Mitsubishi and chose the Eclipse GSX. Moving back to the map, we are now introduced to the race calendar, where it is explained that each Saturday night, a grand qualifier will be held, which rewards a large amount of cash, as well as a custom car, with week 1, for example, offering a riced out Jeep Defender. And so through the week, we will need to earn cash, upgrade our vehicle to the appropriate tier, or purchase a new one, and also have enough cash left over to buy into the qualifier. It's also revealed that the Grand will hold multiple car tier events, with A+, S, and S+ vehicles being required to compete in the Grand Finals. In getting this final formal tutorial, we are now set free to race our way to the qualifiers and fully experience the gameplay loop of Unbound, which consists of winning races, earning cash, purchasing and upgrading vehicles, and competing in grand qualifiers in lead up to the finals, which is a pretty standard NFS formula at this point. Each lead up to a qualifier has 5 daily sessions that consist of a day and night portion, with rotating events that reward varying levels of cash to then be used in prep for the weekly qualifier. In Unbound, as the old saying goes, cash is king, and with more cash, the player will be able to access a wider variety of events, purchase higher tier vehicles, and enhance their performance in an attempt to have the most efficient run to each qualifying event. Meetups themselves, where cash is both earned from placing and spent via buy-ins, consist of a rotation of various events to choose from, with this choice being influenced by a combination of event type and preference, alongside the buy-in price required. An important thing to note, however, is that meetups aren't necessarily a playlist of events that the player can select multiple of to compete in. They are a combination of individual events, and multiple events can't be selected in succession to complete within the same meet. When a race concludes, if there are multiple events in the same meetup that the player is interested in, they will need to travel back to the same meetup point to re-enter that event of interest. As noted already, however, a factor in determining what events will be chosen are the buy-ins, which aren't always proportionate to the cash reward that the race has to offer. The issue here is that with the end goal of the qualifiers having buy-in requirements, as well as an increasing car tier, the loop can turn into a game of strategy and calculation to figure out what events will give the most cash with the least risk that will then lead to a more efficient run towards the qualifier. Now, I don't think there is anything inherently wrong with buying into the races themselves, as I feel they assist in the world building, because after all, the money laid out in these street races needs to come from somewhere, and the risk of losing cash on a race increases the pressure to perform, and makes effective driving matter even more. However, as already mentioned, the buy-ins for a lot of events aren't always proportionate to the reward offered at the end. So should a player find themselves outclassed and out of resets, or leaving an event to try something different, they can lose out on a large volume of cash, which in the early hours can result in a grind of repeating previously completed events to build their cash levels back up to then increase their vehicle's performance, which then results in the need to build more cash to then buy into the previously attempted events. That said though, at the end of the day, the player themselves take the risk, which again adds more weight to the events. However, I feel that they could be tackled differently in order to keep things engaging and avoid some of the grind. For example, if a player was to lose a race and subsequently their buy-in, I think that it would be quite fun to include a rival one-on-one race, where the player could look to either find the winner in the open world or call them to challenge them to a race in order to reclaim their buy-in. Unbound does have a few head-to-head races throughout, however these are quite standard affairs, but the groundwork has been done to allow for some more personal revenge-like racing options to be available to complete. It's also worth noting though that if we make it to a grand qualifier but lack an entry requirement, we are given the option to jump back to the Friday of the same week. So whilst we don't get walled out of the final events, as mentioned, we can get stuck in a rut if we don't strategize well. To increase the cash payout at the end of an event and lighten the load of a buy-in, however, we can also place side bets on a rival racer, with higher rated races offering larger payouts. Combined with the buy-ins, these side bets can also add a lot of pressure to perform and makes the races themselves much more intense and are a welcomed inclusion. Speaking of racing too, there is a variety of events in Unbound to compete in, although there isn't much that is particularly unique. When it comes to the event types, there are your standard sprint races that are a run from A to B, circuit races which have multiple variations such as eliminators, endurance events, and half-pack events which involve only 4 races and with only the first place being rewarded cash, and drift events. However, traditional drag races are strangely absent and have been replaced with speed races, which don't feel as much of a spectacle as the originals. One thing that is disappointing, however, is that the track list feels limited in comparison to other NFS titles. On more than one occasion, I found that the events that provide the greatest rewards were reused multiple times through the same qualifying week. This isn't too much of a problem as the race lengths themselves aren't particularly extensive, but it is still disappointing that the developers didn't use the sprawling map that they have created to be more inventive with their track creation. When it comes to repetition though, as much as I enjoy the rival AI and difficulty, the same races are used across multiple events through each week, so you will become very familiar with the same faces and vehicles across events. It just feels strange seeing such a limited lineup of rivals, because after all, Unbound has worked pretty hard to world build and immerse you in a sprawling and revived street racing scene. But when you only see a handful of races throughout the qualifiers, it does away with some of that immersion. Where the variety does take a turn in events, however, are with takeovers that have a similar formula to the Gymkhana events of the Dirt series. Takeover events are a circuit-like event where the goal is to perform drifts and tackle obstacles in order to build up a multiplier and earn points. Obstacles include purple barrels, green barricades, and small cones that all assist in building the multiplier when destroyed in quick succession, alongside drifts and jumps, and it's all a great time. There are also white barricades with red crosses and flaming barrels that if hit take points away, so rather than just mindless action, there is a skill element to these events as well. These takeover events always feel like a spectacle, and if you want to test out a track before putting money on the line, you can do so by selecting a takeover test track during the day. A strange inclusion to these events though is the introduction of ASAP Rocky, who more or less turns up to give the same few voice lines at the start and the end of each takeover, and to also pick up what I assume to be a pretty big paycheck for stopping by, which is all well and good, but for me he just feels so out of place. His inclusion reminds me of that Game of Thrones episode where Ed Sheeran is sitting around a fire with a group of soldiers, and just like in that moment where I'm sure the producers were expecting a unified cheer, ASAP, like Ed's inclusion, feels quite awkward and unnecessary. There is an event later in the game where you can take a joyride in ASAP's custom Mercedes to help reignite his fire to compete, but even this feels like an off-site interview with ASAP that was pasted directly into the driving sequence. It all just feels weird, and thankfully, besides the joyride, we can easily skip ASAP's dialogue, which is a blessing in my opinion. Now, to enter these takeovers and other standard racing events, as already mentioned, there are 3 different requirements. One being, of course, the aforementioned buy-ins, but also a vehicle tier and a heat requirement for each. The grant requiring 4 vehicles with different tiers also adds nicely to this, because it provides a further gameplay requirement to experiment and use new vehicles, which are a standout here. These vehicles can be accessed in a variety of ways, including purchasing them from the car lot, rewarded for completing challenges, and won from certain races with high buy-in requirements. And in Unbound there is a vast roster of these vehicles to choose from, which are classed from B, that includes options such as Subaru BRZs and Chevys, to S+, including Aston Martin Vulcans, McLarens, and Porsche Spyders to name a few. Each and every vehicle model has incredible detail for an arcade racer as well, and whilst they don't hold simulator levels of beauty, they sure are lookers. But not only do they look wonderful, they sound the part as well, with the throaty chug of the muscle cars and aggressive bursts from the supercars perfectly capturing their power and performance on the streets. Of course though, as is a staple in all Need for Speed titles, these attributes and the vehicles tier can also be enhanced through the simple customization system that Unbound has to offer. With the reputation requirements for high performance parts removed since heat and cash now being the only resource, customization is back to basics like the days of the original Most Wanted, and is a two-sided coin with physical and performance options to consider. We start with body kits, with complete kits available for a majority of vehicles, as well as individual panel options for deeper levels of customization. The developers have unfortunately not brought back the much beloved auto sculpt feature that Carbon popularized, which is a shame because I found that this feature added much more individuality to the vehicles back in the day. And if I was to change anything regarding physical customization in Unbound, it would be adding auto sculpt back in. Once the right kit has been selected though, paint and decals can also be customized to add a personal touch to the cars. Paint is pretty basic with a variety of colors, shades and types available, and decals can be added to each panel to give the cars some extra flair. I'll admit though that the decals and their placement are a bit frustrating to work with, however this wasn't much of a problem with the community library accessible when playing online returning from heat. Here you'll always find both iconic and original designs amongst the bunch, like the Evo having an iconic Tokyo Drift style decal and a Pro Street Rio style for example available amongst the library, and there is well and truly something for everyone in the lineup. Alongside these visual options, we also of course have the option of customizing customizing our driving effect tag, which we have already covered. Once our ride looks the part though, it's time to pop the hood and delve into Unbound's performance customization, which again is simple and accessible, with higher grade parts providing greater levels of performance enhancements. Higher grade parts need to be worked for though, and are locked behind garage levels, which can be purchased for increasing amounts of cash. This need to purchase more advanced levels also feeds nicely into the thematic that the garage is being invested in as we restore it alongside our rides in the racing ranks, which is a nice subtle touch. First up in the upgrade selections are simple engine swaps, which can skip some of the work of selecting individual parts, but also act as a way for a lower tier vehicle to reach its maximum performance. Alongside engines though, individual parts customization can take place, with things like an ECU, turbo, suspension, and brakes for example being able to be upgraded. It's also very simple to see how these parts impact performance, with the vehicle's top speed, acceleration, and performance level indicated with each part selection, so you always know what difference a choice will make. Something from the performance customization I didn't realize until much later, however, are the auxiliary performance options. These are a bit more situational than the standard performance parts and include passive buffs like increased burst nitrous gain from drifts or jumps, increased durability, and also decreased police response time, to name a few. I can definitely see how these would benefit the player through their run, and they are handy through a lot of the post-game cleanup. However, they don't exactly feel integral to the core experience. Once the car is ready to go, the final touches that can be made are related to handling. In Unbound, each vehicle has a handling slider available that allows access to either a more drift or grip-heavy approach to cornering, allowing vehicles to be tuned towards either of the two styles, which can benefit certain event types and activities. It's also of note that suspension and tyres have a more built-in specific impact on vehicles, with the generic road, drift, and off-road setups available that increase the handling slider's range and allow a vehicle to be more specifically tuned. Steering sensitivity also plays into this, with higher sensitivity making the vehicle more responsive, whilst increasing or decreasing downforce also playing a part in the speed of cornering. Getting the balance right takes a bit of time, however once you find the right fit for your favourite cars, it becomes effortless to rip through turns. Even the drifting, whilst not perfect, strikes a good balance between feeling both slick and heavy and controls nicely. It's also incredibly easy to enter a drift, but mastering the drifting system takes time, so whilst anyone can utilise the mechanics, there is a skill element to mastering it. The handling though is a point of contention I have seen online from members of the community, with a general sentiment that the handling feels stiff with too great of an emphasis placed on drifting as opposed to grip handling. Grip turns, for example, are criticised as being too sluggish, and admittedly I do feel this at times when taking a wide bend at high speeds. I also found at times when making turns at high speeds where I did need to apply the brake slightly or release the accelerator for a moment, when I would reapply the trigger to accelerate, my vehicle would begin drifting, which during a speed run or race became very frustrating. With a neutral or drifting setup, I always knew what to expect when hitting a turn or bend and could prepare for it. But with a grip setup, I always found myself needing to juggle the two handling styles, rather than the one I tuned towards, which could always be managed with a bit of practice, but it shouldn't need to be. Although admittedly, I like the handling system that the NFS rebrand has implemented, as apart from more event-specific setups, I enjoy a drifting focus. However, I feel that the system would benefit from a rework in order to cater more effectively to a wider audience, whilst also fixing the issues with the grip-specific handling setups. For example, when a grip setup is utilized, if the player selects a certain percentage on the handling slider towards grip, this sweet spot could then alter the braking setup, with standard braking maintaining the vehicle's grip, with the handbrake acting as a sharp cornering option. Rather than needing to button map initiating a drift between braking or a throttle tap, or turning it off completely to initiate a drift. With that said though, how the handling system stands, although I like the current focus on drift, with such an integral mechanic being divisive and inconsistent, if a rebuild is not done, this will continue to be to the detriment to both the players and the franchise as a whole, which for the likes of Need for Speed would be devastating. With that said though, getting to the point where you have a high-spec garage full of vehicles can take some time as you'll work your way through the ranks. However, Unbound has a clever way of allowing players to access higher-level custom rides early on through Rydell's rides and high heat deliveries, which are staggered throughout the story. Rydell's rides, which occur during the day, involve Rydell calling us and explaining that a client needs a vehicle of theirs driven from one location to another. These then see us driving a higher tier vehicle from A to B under the pressure of a time trial. These events give the player the ability to drive a Mercedes AMG GTR, a Lamborghini Countach, and an off-road spec Mini Cooper to name a few, and they are always a lot of fun. As well as allowing the player to experiment with high-level vehicles early, These events also offer cash rewards, and once completed, allow the particular vehicle that was delivered to be purchased from the car lot as a legendary custom. High heat deliveries, however, are exclusive to the night and start with a call from Tess and involve delivering a hot vehicle to a drop-off location whilst being pursued by police. In these events, a police pursuit begins immediately and vary in their heat level, with higher heat being placed on higher spec vehicles, which range from police ramming Chevys to Bugatti Chirons, making these events high-speed affairs. Adding to the stakes here, rather than a time trial like its daytime counterpart, high heat deliveries rely on the vehicle's condition to determine the rewards available at the end, with perfect condition vehicles providing the highest payout. Initially, I'll admit I wondered how I would pull this off with the cops on my tail from the get-go. However, this is where the humble gas station comes in. Positioned throughout the map, gas stations share the same purpose they held in Heat and act as a vehicle healing station. Once driven through the first time, gas stations will then remain indicated on the map, so they can be located easily and used throughout police pursuits. Their use is also limited by a timer, so they can't be spammed in quick succession, so their use is also partly strategic. These high heat events like Rydell's Rides are a great time, and unlike the other events of the game, they finally give the police an opportunity to shine, albeit not as brightly as I'd hoped. As already mentioned, reputation has been removed as a currency, and although higher levels of heat allow access to higher paying meetups, beyond that, heat and the police play a very minimal, tangible role in the gameplay. The gameplay impact the police do provide is towards the player's cash, where if we are busted during a run, all of our cash earned up to that point is lost, adding to the pressure of an escalating pursuit. Each event within a meetup has a pre-assigned heat generation level attributed to it too, with lower stake events providing heat gain beginning with 0.5. As heat increases, so does the police presence alongside their tactics, starting with standard police cruisers, all the way to undercover and armoured SWAT units alongside helicopters. Each heat level gain is also shown in a post-event screen, so there is an opportunity for the player to size up the competition, as well as get an insight into how to tackle each police unit. Patrol cars, for example, are easily outrun and outmaneuvered in all circumstances, whereas police corvettes are more easily outrun by going off-road, for example. The game literally spells this out during loading screens as well though, saying that police pursuits are more or less a game of rock, paper, scissors. And I admit I like this take on the police, because no matter the heat level or the pursuit, there is always an answer to the police, and it becomes a nice little puzzle to solve, especially at higher heat levels, with undercover and SWAT units, for example, having opposite strengths and weaknesses, so a choice needs to be made as to which unit to tackle first when trying to escape. That said though, because reputation itself has been removed as a currency, there is little need to interact with the police as a whole. Where in prior entries the police were integral to the gameplay loop and needed to be interacted with in order to progress, in Unbound, besides the high heat deliveries, it's more about avoidance than anything when it comes to the cops. The police are also incredibly overused considering the intangible impact they have on progression, with about every race having some form of police presence which serves little purpose other than interruption. Also, driving between events once heat level 1 is achieved and police units are actively looking for you becomes a battle of attrition where we will look to avoid each police unit on our way to an event, rather than seeking them out for a thrill, which adds quite a bit of padding. In a way, this feels like a repeat mistake that players experienced in the transition between the original Most Wanted and Carbon. Most Wanted, of course, placed a large emphasis on the police and made their inclusion an integral part of the gameplay loop, whereas Carbon had police, but they served very little gameplay purpose and were more of an annoyance that the player would look to avoid. The same goes here with the NFS rebrand, where Heat 2 placed a large emphasis on the police and made their inclusion integral, whereas Unbound has police, but they play little part in the gameplay and progression. It's such a shame because what I and a lot of other fans of the Need for Speed franchise enjoy are the intense police pursuits the series was popularized through. However, it appears here that they've dropped the ball. What I feel would finally bring the cops back to their best would be a more tangible reason for their presence. For example, I feel that bounty or reputation could make a comeback, even in the form of another currency that could have an impact on progression. This currency, let's say bounty for now, could be used to access a black market, which could make the aforementioned legendary custom vehicles delivered through the high heat deliveries separately available for purchase once unlocked. Bounty could also be used to access extreme level performance parts, which could be a level above elite, similar to what Heat offered, with the best performance parts being available from this said black market, giving players even more reason to take on the Lakeshore PD. I'd also like to see Bounty have an impact on the races that can be accessed. Although Unbound like Heat has various races locked behind higher heat levels, I feel that a bounty level required for more unique extreme events would add a lot to the excitement of the racing. These events could require a specific level of bounty to be accessed and act as a variant of the head-to-head or half-pack races, with dialed up rival racer difficulty alongside aggression. These aggressive racers would look to play dirty, smashing into the player and police alike, and it would all feel very Blacklist. These are of course only a few of the I'm sure many uses that the reintroduction of a bounty system could have, and in thinking about what could be offered to players even in these few examples, it does make me both disappointed with what is currently on offer, but also optimistic as to what could come next for the series. In a few words though, unfortunately in Unbound, the police are both overused and ineffectively utilised, which is a blemish on an otherwise exciting experience. A fun distraction from the police, however, are Unbound's global activities and collectibles that offer both a quick spot of cash as well as the opportunity to play around with more specialised racing styles. These activities are scattered throughout the map and vary in type, with success measured via a star system, with 3 stars representing the maximum basic score and a rival racer representing the highest threshold to overcome. Speed traps are classic inclusions and involve hitting a max speed when passing a certain point on the map, which are very simple yet fun. In extension of these, speedruns act as short sprint races where the average speed is measured across a short course and vary from straightforward runs to winding countryside affairs, which can lead to quite a few crashes. Hot laps are short and sharp circuit-like events that act as a skill check in handling, with quick finishes holding the greater rewards. Long jumps are pretty self-explanatory affairs, with jump distance being measured for success. And finally, drift events, which can take place in circuits or sprint-like fashions on mountain passes that require both speed and masterful drifting. Although these events can be gamed somewhat by swerving, they are also timed, so stalling for drift distance is somewhat deterred. These events overall are simple in design, but are a great inclusion to the game that allow the player to experience the map and also provide more skill-specific events to complete with adequate rewards for success. Collectibles are also hidden throughout the map and provide small cash rewards, but also unlock cosmetics and vehicles when an entire set is completed, similar to activities. These are more about seek and destroy and include finding street art in the world, destroying billboards, and taking out champ bears that are hidden throughout the world. These activities and collectibles also link into the challenges available to complete in Unbound. These are a mix of active and passive challenges, with the more active challenges being on a daily rotation that when completed provide cash rewards, and passive that are longer term goals, such as completing a certain amount of Tier A races that again provide cash, vehicles, and aesthetic options when completed. Whilst completing all of these events and activities alongside the roar of the engine, driving is accompanied by an international soundtrack that includes various worldwide artists and genres. ASAP Rocky, for example, has quite a few tracks included alongside other names such as Powdyface, Space 92, and Ashby, whom, if you are like me, you have never heard of before. The soundtrack admittedly highlights a wide variety of artists, however, it's not really my cup of tea. That said, I'm more of a Rammstein and Bring Me the Horizon kind of guy, so this isn't exactly a dig at the soundtrack, it's just not going to be for everyone. Something of note as well here is that there is no streaming appropriate or royalty-free music options like some other titles offer. So whilst you can turn off music altogether, it's more of a something or nothing situation. Because of this and copyright, I can't play any tracks here, but the soundtrack can be easily found online or through your preferred streaming service. With that said though, whilst not fitting my preferences, the music does complement the aesthetics of Unbound's compact cast of characters that, like the music, are certainly an acquired taste. The character models themselves have a cel-shaded design which offers a striking contrast to the vehicles and have a greater focus on emotes and comic book-like punctuation in their movements. Apart from Rydell, however, who is a bit corny, still feels well written overall. Yaz and especially Tess though, have some incredibly cringy dialogue. Never have I heard so much slang and the use of the word bro in a sentence that it honestly makes me question who this dialogue was written for. Thankfully though, with Unbound, the focus is on the racing, with the story more so acting as a means to give thematic reasoning to our participation in the racing. In addition to the single player story, however, like its predecessors, Unbound offers an online mode, which upon release was completely separate to the single player, which thankfully later through updates somewhat combined with the single player experience, with single player vehicles and rewards translating straight into the online garage when the mode is entered, reducing the grind that early players experienced. It is a shame, however, that the online modes feel abandoned for the most part. In the online mode, events can only be accessed when multiple players attempt to compete in an event, and with the servers light on traffic these days, I was rarely able to enter a race. Alongside standard races that can be participated in, there are also link-up events which appear in online free roam, that are essentially enclosed takeover events where multiple players can compete to earn points that then reward online XP and cash. However, again with player counts low online, these don't feel like the spectacle I'm sure they once were closer to release. Upon writing in my script though, the Volume 6 update released, which reintroduced Audi into the car selection, as well as adding dedicated PvP. So hopefully through this mode, more events can be experienced by later players. An advantage of having the game logged into the online mode though, is that all activity completions, race wins, and collectibles earn XP, which feed into the online reward system, which can provide additional vehicles and cosmetics. The elephant in the room, however, when it comes to the online, are the micro-transactions that are unfortunately baked into Unbound. Now, admittedly, during my single player run and also during the time I spent online, these never felt in my face. However, the developers have put in some pretty unnecessary options in the shop. There are keys to the map which unlock the location of all activities and collectibles, custom decals, body kits, vehicles, and even some events locked behind a paywall in the form of a premium pass. Some of these are also more or less pay to earn, as many of the available purchases take the form of items and vehicles that can be earned by unlocking an appropriate level using the online XP. As mentioned though, whilst these didn't feel in my face throughout the story or online, their inclusion in my opinion is indefensible, and I do hold concern for what their increasing inclusion means for the future of the series. With all that said, however, whilst online is declining and microtransactions are increasing, I really feel that it's in the single player experience that Unbound shines, and this is especially highlighted in the later segments. Taking back to the Lakeshore Grand qualifiers, by working our way through the weeks and moving closer to the Grand, we eventually confront Yaz and challenge her to a race for pink slips in an attempt to get our car back. Yaz of course opposes and says that if we can make it to the Grand Final, then it's there where the car will be on the line. However, not long after, we experience Unbound's next heel turn. During another confrontation with Yaz, we learn that Tess has been betting on and against the player on behalf of Alec, whilst also orchestrating the high heat deliveries on his behalf. In this confrontation, Tess lets us know that Alec wants to cut a deal and for Yaz and us to throw the Grand Final, and in return, get a large payout. Outraged by this undercutting and betrayal though, Yaz leaves to confront Alec, and we too, disgusted by Tess's dodgy dealings, cut ties with her. Returning to the garage, Yaz also arrives, and she lets us know that the deal offered by Alec through Tess is true. However, Yaz doesn't want to throw a race for the likes of Alec, and finally sees the error of her ways. Although reunited, Yaz still won't give up the original Junker build though. We still need to win the Grand to reap the previously promised rewards and hit back at Alec. By then taking on the Grand and racing through 4 unique and increasingly police-heavy events, we ultimately win, and as promised are rewarded the Junker and a large pile of cash. It's also revealed in victory that Tess wasn't necessarily working for Alec, and that her interests were solely her own, taking advantage of the odds and stacking the deck in her favour to make a quick buck whilst also crossing Alec in the process. With all that said and done though, we make it back to the garage for the final time, where Yaz and Rydell finally bury their demons, and the group stand proud of their work and the lessons learned, ready to work together again in the garage and continuing to grow as a family. And with that, NFS Unbound comes to an end, and whilst the story isn't much to behold, regarding where it stands, there certainly is a lot to consider. Whilst personally I like the handling system at work here, with such a focus on drift over group turning, I can say that a rebuild of this system would go a long way to both cater to a wider audience and prevent the juggling act that a grip-focused build can create with the mechanics designed around a drift focus. Although the Police 2 have seen a reimagining and the developers have tried to reincorporate them back into the day and night cycles, overall they are both overused and inappropriately utilised, with their inclusion mainly providing a minigame of annoyance and avoidance, rather than providing a tangible reason to interact with them due to the lack of a pursuit-based currency. The story too isn't much to behold, and although in the grand scheme of things, the story should in a way take a back seat to the main draw card that is the racing, throughout there feels like very little at stake, and so many of the narrative points are delivered in the background of menus and driving sequences, so much of the weight the story attempts to apply feels lost. Whilst the character models are initially a jarring change to Need for Speed's typical NPCs, they do fit into Unbound's aesthetics well. However, the character creator needs a rework with additional quality of life changes, and the rival racers and their vehicles need greater variety alongside additional options to interact with them beyond a block of text. The microtransactions too, whilst again not in your face, are simply unforgivable and should never hold a place in a AAA title, and shamelessly allow players to buy their way to rewards rather than working towards them, whilst also locking some players completely out of content should they refuse to buy into the quote-unquote premium passes. Those criticisms aside though, the vast selection of vehicles is fantastic, and whilst not as varied as a racing sim, the options are plentiful enough for there to be something for everyone, and their models are wonderful reflections of their real-world counterparts. The sense of speed experience whilst behind the wheel of these cars is also something to behold, with Unbound expertly utilising its lighting and motion blur to enhance the feeling of intense near misses and overtakes whilst at top speed. The driving effect options too bring even more personality to the vehicles and the racing, being brilliantly implemented and are a wonderful inclusion. The Nitrous Burst, whilst not perfect, is also a great addition to the gameplay, enhancing the sense of speed and providing an additional option for recovery from mistakes, which allow the player to be continually engaged in the racing thrill. This system too could do with a rework by placing a greater emphasis on strategy and tangible speed as opposed to quickfire bursts. However, as a groundwork mechanic, there is a bright future ahead for this inclusion. With all that said though, back at the open, I said that I wanted to see for myself if Unbound was all show and no go, or if it could stand with the series best. And what conclusion I have drawn many many hours in is that Unbound to me isn't necessarily the best or worst of the NFS series, but it is a sleeper hit. I say this because although the police are misused, the story isn't great, and their handling is divisive, underneath these mechanics and systems there is something incredibly enjoyable here. The driving, which should always be the focal point of an arcade racer, is wonderful, with the sense of speed and the sound design of the engines and tyres thrilling. The rival AI is aggressive and challenging, and whilst also inconsistent at times, it creates incredible pressure and intensity when behind the wheel, making every corner, mistake, and overtake matter. The open world activities also give the player the chance to experiment with the vehicle tuning and provide additional skill-based milestones to overcome, which in doing so are well rewarded. Unbound also provides an opportunity for the developers to learn from their mistakes and take on the feedback of both critics and gamers alike, to take the groundwork that has been laid here through the burst nitrous, handling and police mechanics, and use the voice of the community to build something even greater in the future. As an overall racing package though, Unbound is fantastic, and there is a lot of fun that can be had when picking up the controller and taking to the streets of Lakeshore. In a few words, whilst it's not perfect, it comes so close to being great and is overall a lot of fun. So don't sleep on Unbound, it's well worth taking for a spin. A big thank you as always if you've made it to the end of the video, I really appreciate it. In this video, I've tried to break up the story through the retrospective review points, and I hope this added a better flow to the video. If you enjoyed the video though and have played Unbound, I'd love to read about your experience below in the comments. As always, I'd also love some feedback, which has been helping me develop my video and editing style over the past few entries. And each comment does make a difference, so be sure to leave one below and let me know what I can improve or if you enjoyed this video style. Thank you again for making it this far, and if you've made it to this point, be sure you're subscribed and leave a like on the video. If you want to see more videos like this one, be sure to check out the playlist in the end screen or links in the description, as I'm sure there will be something you'll enjoy. All the best to you, and as always, have a great day, gamers.